Let's look at an example of using the object system. Here's something to remember. When you look up an attribute by name on an instance, you find instance attributes before you find class attributes. And if you don't find the attribute on the instance, you look in the class. If you don't find it in the class, you look in the base class. And in this way, class attributes are inherited. Here's an example. Let's say we have a class of worker. The worker greets others as sir, has a constructor that sets an attribute elf to the class worker, has a method work, which returns the greeting of the object passed in, that's self, plus I work, and finally has a special method repr. And this repr method is used to display what a worker instance looks like when you're running an interactive session. Now this repr string is very weird. And instead of doing anything with self at all, it takes bourgeoisie and returns its greeting. The bourgeoisie are the landowners, the ones who own the means of production. And so, instead of working themselves, they gather wealth by employing their peons. To work, they say, I gather wealth. Jack is a worker, John is a bourgeoisie, and here we've assigned the greeting attribute of Jack to be man. If you want to work through this problem yourself, from Fall 2014 Midterm 2, here are some of the prompts. Let's go through exactly what happens when we execute all of this code. So the first thing is that when we have a class statement, its body gets executed immediately, and so it creates a new class called worker, where there's a class attribute greeting, which is valued at sir. This isn't an environment diagram, this is just a sketch of what's going on. The bourgeoisie class inherits from worker and has its own greeting peon. In this case, you don't change the greeting of the worker. It's just that if we looked up the greeting for a bourgeoisie instance, it would find this before it found that. Then these two lines create a worker instance and a bourgeoisie instance. The worker instance is created and then passed immediately into the constructor, where it gains an attribute elf, which is bound to whatever the name worker is bound to. And worker is the name of the worker class. So elf's value is this whole thing, the worker class. John gets created because bourgeoisie does not have an init method. It inherits the init method from worker. So we look up, is there an init in bourgeoisie? No, there's not. So we look in the base class and we apply this one, which has the same effect. So both Jack and John have the same elf. Finally, we have the line jack.greeting equals man. If we just looked up jack.greeting, we'd look here and find there was no greeting, so we would look in the class, and the answer would be sir. However, attribute assignment has the rule that it always assigns immediately to the object to the left of the dot. So the effect of jack.greeting is that now Jack will have its own instance attribute greeting bound to man. Jack greets people as ma'am. Any other worker greets people as sir. Now let's go through these examples. Worker, with parentheses after it, creates a new worker instance. Here we invoke its work method, which gets the self.greeting for the newly created worker. The worker doesn't have a greeting instance attribute, so we look in the class and we find sir. Adding sir to iWork returns sir iWork. Okay, Jack is a worker. When I just write Jack and then evaluate that expression, it evaluates to this worker instance, but we want to be able to display that as a line of text. That's how interactive sessions work. And the way they work is by computing the repr string for the object that's the value of the expression. So what's the repr string of Jack? Well, Jack is a class worker. Worker has this special method named repr, which is exactly what gets invoked every time you want to display an object. So what does it return? Well, it returns bourgeoisie.greeting. Here's the bourgeoisie class. Its greeting is peon. And so what we'll see here for Jack is peon. What about Jack.work? Jack is a worker. The work method returns self.greeting plus I work, where self is bound to Jack. Jack's self.greeting is specialized. It's man. So what we get here is that self.greeting evaluates to ma'am, add that to I work, and you get ma'am, I work. What about John.work? Well, we look up the work method in John. The instance doesn't have one, but the bourgeoisie class does have a work method. And what it does is it prints the result of calling the work method of worker on self. Self is John. Okay, the work method on worker is this work, and so we're going to print out John's greeting plus I work. Now what is John's greeting? Well, John doesn't have a greeting instance attribute, but its class does, and that class has the greeting attribute peon. So we print out peon I work. After that's finished and printed out, this returns I gather wealth. So what we see is peon I work, I gather wealth. Now this one has quotes around it because it's a return value. And so we're trying to write down a repr expression that evaluates to the same string that was returned. Peon I work does not have quotes around it because it was printed. Printing a string does not print the quotes around the string, it just prints the contents of the string. Finally, we have John.elf.workJohn. What's going on there? Well, we look at John's elf attribute, which is the worker class. The worker class has a function work, so this is the one we're calling, and we're calling it on John. So we have to look up John's greeting, which is peon. We looked at that already. Add that to I work, and we get peon I work as a string. When you return a string, you see it with quotes around it. That's the representation of a string that evaluates to that string.